Good afternoon. Thank you for the conversation we've had this morning. Good follow on now talking about meeting energy targets and how KNX can help you meet the targets in reduction of carbon. So targets are in place now. So 2022, we're looking at a 31% reduction in carbon emissions for all new domestic buildings and extensions. One of the great ways of doing that is, we say at the bottom here, talk about intelligent controls, having controls to control the lighting, the heating, the ventilation tied into motion, into actual temperatures going on, and also to daylight linking. And then we're looking at 2025, talking to 75 to 80% reduction in carbon emissions. We're talking about reducing targets of meeting carbon zero buildings. There's a lot of work that must be done in reducing these energy consumption. So how can we do that? One of the advantages with KNX is you can have one control, often a case of one sensor that can be used to control all the energy, linking in from the lighting control to the ventilation control, to talking earlier today about thermal gains, putting in blind control when rooms are actually occupied. But the key thing is about meeting at the beginning. So when we're talking about KNX, is generally we're talking about the whole building cost. When we're talking about the new building, which can mean a little bit higher cost in the design and installation stage, but you have that better control in the future of the building. One of the difficulties in development of especially housing in the UK is a lot of it is existing structures that's not often changed. People leave it as it is. So one of the key things about new buildings is going, right, where am I going to be in 25 years' time? What can I do now to have the product installed, to have that intelligent control, to have better energy reduction? So one of the things is about using products more effectively, combining the technologies together. And KNX does that very well. So why KNX? I mentioned earlier about linking things in. We're linking in the lighting, the security systems, having single points to control the whole system, having the interfaces, and also having the smart homes that people talk about, having them that are not overfilled with technology. Having a ceiling that looks smart, in the sense of not having lots of nodes, lots of points, of trying to have that efficiency of the control that's out there. So having better interfaces in the systems. I don't know if you find, Iain, what are people looking for in their interfaces for their controls? Do they have choices, or are they looking for you to help guide them?
I think largely they rely on my suggestion. If I'm honest, I think most people will fall in line with what you are proposing, but like everything with humanity, you end up with people that are quite particular. So from something as simple as the building material, so the material of the product, so whether it's metallic or plastic,
or how it looks.
No, how it feels.
It feels.
How it feels, not necessarily. The how it looks is easily answered with a photograph, but the how it feels under finger is important. Equally, I had a client who wanted to ended up trying about 10 different manufacturers' products so that they felt the right kind of micro switch under their finger.
So tactile response.
So they're looking for some kind of tactile or haptic response from their products, and perhaps that's an indication of where we're at with touch technologies, your phones all having some form of feedback. So
keyboards on laptops is very...
And I think, I don't think it will be long. I think there are a couple of manufacturers that do have some haptic products in their KNX switch range.
Well, so it's changeable.
It gives you a little vibration. It's something that gives you a physical feedback so that you know that something's happened. But I think in terms of energy, my clients in their choice of physical product, the two don't align. in terms of the physical products and then the choice of how it looks. I think that's two separate discussions. But in terms of energy conservation, it's just a strange dynamic. Some of my clients in the past have turned around and said, "You see my house, why do I need to conserve energy?" And it's completely the wrong conversation, really, in a sustainable world. Interesting, that very same customer 10 years later said, "I need to do something about my energy use." So we had more business going back and putting back everything that we turned up to full 10 years previously, turning it back to 20% unregulated. But,
So do you think we're going to change that level from, was a smart building because you had that automatic response and maybe seamless control? Do you think now that energy conservation has been thought about a bit more?
Shoehorned into the back door, maybe. Yeah. I think... So one of the big advantages, I think, of choosing the correct control system, regardless of what it is, who it's made by, is knowing that control system can change and adapt. And you could make a similar analogy with houses. Rafal in the audience made mention about houses for life in Europe. The basic facts are the housing estate that's going up around Farnborough at the moment, of which there will be many. The houses aren't houses for life. They're houses for sale to meet a demand. And you'll go in and it's still 2 up, 2 down with a steep staircase. The moment you hit 75, 80 and start having mobility issues, that house is totally unsuitable for you. Quite a few people are building houses now, building access to have a lift shaft put in at a later date. And this isn't some ginormous thing with pulleys and pistons. This is a residential lift. Residential lifts today cost £30,000. If you look at them in 10 years' time, they'll cost 10. Demand will have increased, the facility to put them into homes will have increased, and why not have a lift instead of a staircase?
But do you think also that comment about age and houses, but so it's that flexibility as well?
Absolutely.
Having the ability to change.
I think there's so many choices that people make in assisted living scenarios. I think the most important to most of us as we consider what we are going to need in later life is access to services. But statistically, 75% of us live near cities, live near big towns, certainly in this country. So I think the choices people make about where they live aren't necessarily always focused on the home. They're focused on the combination of the home, how difficult it will be to navigate at later years, but also whether the shop's close, whether their GP's close, whether the hospital, their children, their family, their support network.
But it's like what Raphael's quite earlier about, social mobility or people moving houses. That we have a house because I'm working. We live in London first of all. God, it sounds a bit bad, but have children. You want to move out of London, to, more for greenfields and schools, and then you retire. Some people want to move to North Devon later on. That whole you don't live in a house for life. So.
But there is an element, though, that because we don't live in a house for life, then that house or those houses, those buildings should be more flexible.
Because it can fit into different...
So they can fit into different... So that house that you may move out of and someone else moves into it, they're not necessarily going to have exactly the same aspirations or life goals or their immediate requirements. But by having a system that, going back to the thinking about energy conservation, as long as that energy conservation is going on potentially in the background. So you were talking there, Iain, about the choice, that customer choice of what they want on the front end, how that feels to them and their reaction. But in reality, what's going on behind is still the same thing.
Whether it feels...
Yes, you are still saying you're still going to turn the heat up and down or the ventilation, and you want it to do it in the most efficient way. You want that when you turn your heating down. What you don't want to be doing is also to have another element. Why turn your heating down? If it's due to lack of shading. So you want those elements to be integrated. So being able to look at that as an overall.
But do you think is that almost expected? With the KNX point of view, that it's almost like a given. You have that efficiency in the system anyway. That you have those changes.
I think
we do.
I think most people are completely unaware of that.
Yes, but I think
most people really are completely unaware of any of those elements because they choose not to care, really. And I don't think it's a case they don't care. I just think it's a low-level consideration that they make. And I think going back to what you said about people moving houses during their life as their needs change, that's down to the fact that people have to move because the house won't support their change of needs, as opposed to having the choice to move because I want to move, not because I can't climb my staircase anymore. If you take away that part of the decision process, that the house is not suitable, then people perhaps would have the ability to be in a house for much longer, where they've made lots of great neighbours. And I think my wife and I are having a conversation about our retirement currently. And one of the conversations we have is this your forever home, or is this your home that effectively you might pass away in? And morbid conversations for sure, but equally very practical. And I think most people take a viewpoint at some point in their life that they need to downsize, would be one term, but make life a bit more convenient so that they don't have to rely on driving to the GP. They don't have to rely on getting in their car and doing 7 miles to go to Tesco's. And town centres are built up on that basis of the fact that if you're close to a town centre, you have access to all the provisions, hospitals, whatever it happens to be. So I think what would be nice to have is the option to move because you wanted to, not because your conditions changed and your home became completely unlivable for you. And I think that's where we're at with admittedly, we've got housing stock that goes back 1,000 years in some cases, but if we say our modern housing stock is anything up to 250 years old in some towns, we're woefully unprepared for that process. But every new house that's built perhaps should be considered that it could be a house for life. It doesn't have to be a house that, as someone's needs change, they have to move out because they can't navigate the staircase, they can't use that.
That's also, about the system. We're living longer, hopefully. Yeah. We're living longer, but be a bit more, a bit more decrepit, so you need more support in your house, more easy access or whatever. But it's about having that choice, isn't it?
Yeah. And that choice not being dictated or channeled because of a limitation that you've got around you, perhaps.
Yeah. Thank you. So, final slide on this session, we're talking about the benefits of KNX for designers, specifiers and end users. We were talking earlier today about the choices. We talked about 530 odd manufacturers and growing who make products that are suitable for the KNX system, ongoing. And also ongoing in terms of where KNX is going as organisations. We're companies in America now, linking to KNX, all the way in America to Australia. But also about future-proofing the technology. We're talking about changing there for, I suppose, crudely put, having a smart home where it's that efficient use of systems, adding those benefits from energy saving. Looking at the energy monitoring of the building and what's going on. Requirements coming in now that, for large building, commercial buildings and factories that have high energy consumption, there has to be that demand control. So, there's the concern that there will not be enough energy production. So what happens to domestic, people? Also, a whole example, Football World Cup, tea break, all the kettles go on. What happens to that demand control? So having a factory, using a lot of energy at that time, having that demand control of choice. We're also talking about today about a safe and secure system where there are protocols and passwords and protection in there to have a system that cannot be hacked. You cannot be held to ransom. Looked after. And also in terms of efficiency, time saving and easier and more efficient installation of the building. And linking in, one of the things with KNX is having a multiple system, but behind one platform controlling those multiple systems. As we were saying earlier about the shading system, the ventilation elements, and the energy control. So having those choices. I think that was my final slide. Thank you.
If I may add something rather than actually putting a question, I believe that there are some kind of 3 levels where we should carry this discussion further. The first level, Iain already mentioned about it, is education, but I would actually go a little bit further. We as a KNX association should have some, maybe not impact, but some kind of actually award passed through to the educational boards or people who write the curriculums to implement that kind of actually education of the good habits and awareness of control, helping meeting the targets, energy conservation targets, to the youngest publicity. So kids in a high school, once they have a science lesson, they should be made aware that there are already ways of actually conserving the energy through the good habits, but also through technology. That's not really happening in this country. I'm a father of actually a 15-year-old, and we're revising now for GCEC, and science doesn't really cover that. I mean, that's something what is completely neglected. So we approaching a topic from a tradesman way, so garden way, rather than actually going front door and with a specifically tailored leaflets to all, let's say, elements implemented to the curriculum where our kids are being thought about it, because we might be talking as a industry fellows understanding the topic, but as long as we educate the customer, I mean the end user, we won't be able to do it. Now the second level, I think so, Paul, you'll be very familiar with it, because you can implement KNX sensor to assist in a habit change. There's a practical example over there of one of the customer who we have been helping out. He's a contractor, where in some of the rooms he put the motion detectors taking part in the logic of the present detection. So because most commonly used function in a smart homes is all on, all off. That's the most commonly used function. For sake of argument, we asked one of the integrator to put the log on the server to monitor which functions are being mostly used, and that's what it is that 60% of using smart home, utilizing smart home functionality, is actually all on, all off. And only 40% is responsible for kind of actually local dimming, and set point is barely used. Once it's set it up 21 degree, it stays 21 degree pretty much.
But do you think that's one of the problems we have about commissioning in systems, that you see first we see a specification, yeah?
Yeah.
The system goes in, and then you don't come back and then reevaluate what.
But that's another scenario. So that particular integrator, following our recommendation, he wired the house as a kind of actually future-proof. So he left cable somewhere about the ceiling, like the loops for future motion detectors, and he used only 2 areas where he put that motion detector combined with that logic strategy for switching the light on. And amazingly, customer came back to him at the later stage, and just a few months down the line, he just installed the motion detectors everywhere. Now, the motion detectors is taking part in the logic of A, heating, B, lighting. And that's how they help the client to assist on the habit change. Now, down the line, they also verify the areas which are most commonly used and those which are not used. And again, sensor can be put where the areas are most commonly used. Obviously, everyone will be thinking about kitchen and living room, but that might be even a gym or some kind of actually a conservatory. Yeah, so that would be the second point. And I think so, again, Iain mentioned about it, utilizing functionality of KNX to meet the targets really require from us bending a little bit and helping out the designers and specifiers to tailor the specification and also description of a job to really meet that target. to implement and really use the benefit of a KNX. Majority of houses, when you come out, it's okay, it's light on, off, dim, up and down, change of set point, maybe iPad control. There's no really a in-depth analytics, which is, we're talking about the big data, but we as a KNX industry, we can collect that data, keep it locally on a server as a logs, and then revise it on the annual visit. However, Paul, you mentioned it. Yeah, that's true. There is no revisit because customer. So going back to our conversation about houses rotating very quickly, so it's difficult to keep up who is really the real owner of the property at that particular moment. And because there is no maintenance plan going further, no one really revised that data, no one really adjusted into the in order to utilize the real functionality of a KNX.
The beauty of the KNX system, the beauty of the KNX installation and the system and the protocol is this element that it's continually upgradable, it is continually adaptable, and as that end user, that resident changes, it has that ability to change. This is really evident, in an area that is one of my particular sort of core favourites, the assistive technology. When you have a single building, a single room or a flat, if that person's specific requirements, it could be someone, say, that's profoundly deaf is in that flat, is going to be completely different from the flat that's next door, that is an identical physical layout, but it's someone that has a mobility issue. Now, there can be two identical floor plans and installations, but KNX allows that flexibility, that changes within those systems. So that really brings, that level of ongoing future-proofing. What we talked about, future-proofing and building sustainability. Building sustainability is, we need to think much further about. That building has been there 20 years. Okay, pull it down, and we'll just build a new building to tick that box that we now need to do. So I know surely that structure, that physical structure, the amount of embodied carbon within a concrete construction is very high. But because concrete can be around for 200 years, it can be seen. It's an open to conversation, but it can be seen to be over the length of the building. It's quite an efficient building material from a carbon point of view, but not if we're going to pull it down in 20 years' time and then go through the whole process again. So if we're building buildings that can stand up for a long time, why not build in an infrastructure that can do the same as well? And that's something that whole idea of going down of conservation of fuel and energy, of achieving carbon targets. Say KNX is just made for this. This is what we need to be doing. And again, going back to, as we've all mentioned on every session, and it's come out from the audience as well, is the education and information back to the architects, the designers, the M&Es, the end users, the residents, whoever they are, but about what true building automation brings to you, to that particular person and that particular building. That's.
So do you think that industry somehow might mislead the end user? In example, I would understand control as a comfort, where a majority of the British publicity understand the control as a putting TV around or just kind of actually
associated with luxury.
Yeah. So I think so. We misleading that. That's where the education should go to pretty much pick up on that angle. That control doesn't mean luxury, as Iain mentioned, but it's actually real control, comfort, bringing comfort to your
and flexibility
day-to-day activities. Yeah.
And flexibility,
and
ultimately, which is what we talk about within KNX, the flexibility to adapt. I think just to maybe bring this to a close, you mentioned having a 15-year-old at school. You would imagine that all kids as teenagers nowadays would know what to recycle and how to recycle it. Can I ask you a question? Do your kids put stuff in the right dustbin at home?
Yeah, they actually do.
Oh, you've not got children. Hats off to Rafael's children.
Only because a living room is an open plan with a kitchen, so
And
I
you can
always
see it. Yeah. No, I think education is always the answer. To answer your question initially about education via colleges and schools and making children aware of what their choices are as they grow older, the only downside we have encountered is the lack of standardisation across the education system. And although you would think we have a standardised education system, the LEAs, the local education authorities, all act on their own in regards to this, and anything that involves altering or adding to a syllabus, you immediately end up with all the schools becoming very nervous, and they all have to more or less act independently, it would seem. But I love the idea. If we could do that, I remember growing up in the 70s and seeing the information films at school, and they would tell you about the dangers of farms, and they'd be horrific videos, but as kids it wasn't schooling, it was watching a video. But they were dripped out in school, whether it was crossing the road, whether it was playing on farms, whether it was dangerous high voltage lines, they were there and they were in the background. So as a child, you ignored them, but you knew that there were dangers present. Something like that would work, but I just see it as a big mountain to climb.
Well, I believe that we can actually achieve that goal in very kind of economic way. One way is to build up the template of a letter, which each of us gonna send to our local MP as a member of KNX UK, pointing that this should be considered and listing our organization as a member of the public debate. The second element could be a very simple animated movie which explains the elements of it, which can be maybe done for like a couple of thousand and just present it and just put it out there. And even money for or kind of actually a funding for such a campaign can be obtained from the government. These days they do have a very broad sustainability sort of like educational funds, and we could use it. I was just wondering if board are going to take it on into the consideration.
Absolutely, we'll put it onto the agenda for our next board meeting. Tracy will make a note. This is what the association's about, Rafael. I'm sure you appreciate that. It's about us sharing ideas and trying to take the benefit of many and condense it down into one message, and I think that's fantastic. I'm really impressed. So.
No, I totally agree. I think, as we said, it's about trying to educate. It crosses all those sectors, from the children to the homeowners to our members, giving them choices.
And now's probably the most pertinent time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Everyone's feeling the pinch, everyone's looking for ways of extracting benefits. So
Yeah, as we were saying today, so, talk about for KNX of reducing energy, being more efficient. So thank you very much for all your time today. We look forward to seeing you again soon, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom.